Hi everybody, it's Paul here. Today we're going to be talking about how to make sauerkraut. If you're watching this video, you probably already know how amazing it is as a pro and prebiotic for your gut biome, so I'm not going to get into that at all. Today we're just going to talk about the how-to. So the method I use for making sauerkraut, I love to use this German harvest pot or fermenting pot. I found this one on Amazon and I'll include a link to it later on. This one is 5 liters, which is 1.3 gallons. It's perfect size. If you get anything bigger than that, it's actually a little bit hard to lift. This particular one comes with a tamping tool, which is very useful, as well as these stones that you put on top of your cabbage after you've put it in the harvest pot, and that weighs it down and helps the fermenting process. So the ingredients are super simple. It's basically cabbage. If you only wanted to use cabbage, that's great. We kind of like to put a few carrots in also. So this right here constitutes basically one load. You'll see that there's 4 heads of green cabbage, 2 heads of purple, and we've got 6 carrots. Sometimes you can't fit all of it in there. It just kind of depends on how big the cabbage is. My lovely wife already went to the store and got these for me today, and she peeled off the outer layer. So that's an important step to remember. You want to peel off the outer layer of these. You don't need to peel the carrots, just need to wash them off a little bit. And now this is the tool over here. It's called a salad machine, which we use to cut up all the cabbage and the carrots. To do that by hand would take forever. I don't know if this particular machine is still even available, but I found one that's similar on Amazon. I'll also keep a link. I'll also put a link on the video for you there too. Okay, so now let's work on the cabbage. All right, I've taken the core out of this cabbage. I've sliced it into 1/2 into 4 or 5 different sections, ones that will easily fit into my salad machine here. I'm using this blade, the one with the long flat slits in it. This is what works very best for grinding up the cabbage. And I just take a big bowl, all right, like this. Start to put it in and just grind it. Now you can use any type of food processor that you want. This is something that I like because it doesn't require any electricity, and it's also very, very fast and efficient. Okay, so here we have some shredded up ingredients. We've got the carrots, the purple cabbage, and the green cabbage. I used this attachment for the carrots so that it could shred them up really nicely. So the idea here is this is about 1 head of green cabbage, and then in this instance, since we have 2 of the little purple cabbages, I'll put in about half a purple cabbage with each of the larger green cabbages, and then just basically about 1/6 of the carrots we'll put in kind of each load, like that. Now we also add salt, so we're going to use this sea salt here. I put in about 1.5 or 1.25 tablespoons per head of cabbage. So we're going to be using 6 total cabbages today, 4 greens and 2 purples. So that means it's going to be altogether 7.5 tablespoons. But I usually like to fill up this one bowl here first and then put in a 1.25 tablespoons of salt, and then we'll use the tamper, and I'll show you how that works. All right, so here's our first tablespoon of salt, and then just a little bit less than 1 teaspoon of salt, so altogether about 1.25 tablespoons of salt. Now let's grab our tamper, and we're going to tamp this down, and it'll take a few minutes for each bowl of this size. You want to tamp it until you can start to see the color turn. Making sauerkraut is all about getting the brine that is created from the salt interacting with the cabbage and the carrots. And so the tamping will actually accelerate that process. And it's also important because you want to get as much cabbage and carrots as reasonably possible in your mixture at the same time. So tamping it down also helps condense it, plus it gets the brine creation process started. So you can see now, looking into this bowl, that it's become somewhat transparent, and you can see that some of the brine is already starting to ooze out. You can even hear it, you know, kind of how squishy it is. So it's probably taken me 5 to 7 minutes of pounding on this volume of cabbage to get it to that point. And now once we're at that point, it's time to start putting it in our harvest pot. So for this part, we're just going to transfer it by hand into the harvest pot. Notice I'm wearing gloves because one of the challenges with sauerkraut is that you can get mold. And so we want to avoid as much of that potential as possible by just being very careful with the things that we touch. So you can see I'm just putting it in by hand here. And then once it's in, we're going to use our tamper tool again and just kind of mash it down in there a little bit so that it's nice and good. You don't want to have a ton of air pockets in there because you want to get the maximum value out of each load of sauerkraut. Now, we like to let our sauerkraut ferment for 5 weeks. And so 5 weeks is a long time between loads. We only have one harvest pot. So again, that's why we like to put as much in as possible to maximize each batch. So after you've put a load into the harvest pot, it's also very important to put the lid on top also. As soon as the fermentation process starts, it starts generating carbon dioxide, and you want to just do the very best you can to keep all of the moisture and everything inside there, because the better you do that, the better your sauerkraut will turn out in the end. Okay, so if you just look in here, you can see how high I filled it up. This is about the max that you want to put in here, because the next step is to put the weighing stones in. And the weighing stones in, as you can see, they come in 2 pieces and they don't fit in the opening like this, so they have to go in one at a time. And if you put too much cabbage in there, it makes it really difficult. But you want to fill it up as much as you can. So notice how I kind of smash one side of it in there, and then I slide as much of the sauerkraut off the top of it as possible and move it over to the right a little bit. And then you do the same thing with the other one. You just have to kind of force it down in there. Now the weighing stones, you want to have as much of the cabbage underneath them as possible, but it's not absolutely a problem if some of the cabbage gets on top. But the more that's beneath it, the better. Now, if you look inside, you can see how much brine has already been created. That brine will continue to grow, and it will actually ultimately probably overflow the top. So, now that that's done, we put the lid on, and then the very final step is to put water around the edge of this little moat. So part of the beauty of this German harvest pot is the engineering. We're going to put some water around the edge of the rim here, this moat, and that keeps all the oxygen out from the inside of your sauerkraut, which is really important to prevent the problem of mold. If you've tried to make sauerkraut in a different type of container, you may have experienced mold. Most people do. But every morning or every night, you need to check this and just make sure if the water has gone down a little bit that you add some more in there. And it will allow the carbon dioxide that's inside to bubble out, and you'll hear the little bubbles going periodically so that you know that your sauerkraut is working. But you never want to let this get dry. If you never let this get dry, even for 5 weeks, then you won't have any mold inside your pot when you're done, and it will taste glorious. There's a couple other things that you should know. First of all, I always use organic cabbage when I do this. Organic seems to be more solid and sturdy and hardy, and so I guess you could use a non-organic if you want, but we figured based on what it costs to buy sauerkraut at the store, this will save you possibly well over $100. So if you spend a little bit extra on the organic cabbage, I think it will be well worth your while. Second thing is, you may notice that there gets to be some mold around the ring sometimes after a few weeks in this little water. Don't worry about that, because the only reason there's mold growing in here is because it's in the presence of oxygen. Inside, it's called anaerobic digestion. There is no oxygen in there, so you're going to be fine. If you see some mold here, it's easy to just pour a little water in there and kind of scoop it out, clean it up. You just never want to let it get dry, and if it does get a little moldy, you can even pour a little vinegar around this ring to kill off some of the mold. And other than that, we always mark our calendar for 5 weeks from the day that we made it, and I think you'll be really thrilled with the end result.